Hello everybody, and welcome to today's Axonius webinar. First, we want to say thank you for taking the time out this morning to join. My name is Leyton Jefferies. I'm Head of Cybersecurity here at CSI and today's hosting partner in partnership with Axonius. I'm kindly joined today with David Bradley from Axonius. David will take us through Axonius shortly in more detail, accompanied by a demo overview of today's solution. Just to sort of set the scene, set out some of the shop floor, if you like, or housekeeping for today's webinar. Today's webinar, as I mentioned, will be recorded and will be sent out today after today's call, accompanied with also the slide deck for those that would be interested in following up or reading from today's webinar, along with any accompanying type data sheets or material that we think we would like to share with you as a copy following the webinar. Any questions that you may have from today's webinar, please feel free to use the chat in the Zoom window. You can send myself some questions throughout the webinar, and I'll try and bring those into the webinar with David and myself so that we can try and answer those as we go through today's presentation. So the agenda and focus, what we want to plan to cover off and take you through today is how Axonius platform is redefining how we approach cybersecurity. So if you can't see it, how can you protect it? Today's webinar is going to look to cover providing unparalleled visibility into the ever-evolving digital landscape around the ecosystem. We'll run through how Axonius can provide asset discovery using asset management inventory data, so using the use of accurate asset data, and how it can be used to protect assets and respond to cyber incidents. How Axonius can help with vulnerability management, reduce risk, and enhance your existing tool sets with a stronger, more secure maturity model. And share with you through automation how we can help close, remediate any action using and leveraging your existing tool sets through policy enforcement. So before we start, I would like to do a quick intro to who CSI are and myself, run through a quick overview, set the scene of the types of challenges that we here at CSI see from other clients when it comes to gaining visibility across all assets today, including things like SaaS, hybrid cloud, mobile working, shadow IT. And then I'll look to hand over to David so we can bring to life today's webinar on how Axonius can help you bridge the gap between asset management to asset intelligence. So who are CSI? So as I mentioned, my name is Leyton Jefferies. I've been with CSI since 2014. I'm responsible for all things security services, security service strategy, vendor partner alignment, and generally oversee CSI's design of security solutions, portfolio, and SOC operations. So CSI, we were founded in 1983. Last year was our actual 40th anniversary, our 40th birthday. We have roughly around 250 employees, probably 80% of that is made up of service delivery, so operations across NOC and SOC. We have probably today sitting around 155 clients under management. We are a managed services provider across a multitude of technologies, vendors, and services. We deliver true 24/7 around-the-clock coverage from both our NOC and SOC with regards to services that we provide across security, public cloud, and infrastructure as a service. And all of our technologies typically that we work with are industry leading. As you can see, some of the vendors that we have in our portfolio are on the slides today. And David, if you don't mind going to the next slide, what I would like to do is to sort of intro, if you like, the slides for today's webinar. Perfect. So before I hand over to David and take you through today's webinar then, I want to set the scene, if you like, and share with you some of the client challenges we've seen working with customers here at CSI, which I think might resonate in today's webinar and some of you on today's call. So if we probably go back sort of 10, 15, 20 years or so now, probably plus that, it was relatively easy to understand where our assets were. An IT manager could simply ask the question, how many computers or printers or what software that was being used within a physical office space. If you fast forward to today, the landscape and today's digital environment looks very different in regards to more complex new asset classes that have come onto the scene. We're obviously now a much more hybrid model as organizations and businesses working still within sort of private and consuming public cloud services, which introduces a number of SaaS-based solutions and software also. So this obviously potentially has an impact to things like shadow IT, being able to identify unmanaged devices or detecting unauthorized software that is obviously coming onto either our networks or how we are consuming the applications from our laptops or desktops now, potentially post-COVID, where we are working more mobile and more remote than ever. Without an accurate asset inventory, I think it's fair to say that many organizations that we've seen, they have identified gaps in their security coverage. So without going into too much detail and letting David sort of run through the demo, I mean, some of the examples that we've seen particularly are around visibility of all assets and status in regards to agent and coverage health. In effect, how can you identify devices not known to key tools or those that have either a broken agent that are not reporting in correctly? So in summary, if we look at why we've partnered with Axonius, we believe a comprehensive, credible inventory of all your digital infrastructure is a prerequisite for understanding and securing a company's attack service. So today's webinar is very focused around CAASM, so Cyber Asset Attack Surface Management. And what I'll do now is I'll hand over to David to take us through today's demo.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Leyton. So yeah, today you're going to kind of hear me touch on a couple of reoccurring points, like Leyton has already kind of set the scene for, right? And we're really looking at this topic of asset intelligence as opposed to traditional asset management. And we'll, even though that might sound a bit wordy, we'll talk through what that actually means as we go through this, okay? If you've seen or you joined any of our webinars before, we usually start off with this kind of a tweet slide, right? Nothing, super deep here, but it gives a nice kind of I suppose it encapsulates the problem, right? A very, very simple question that's posted, and this was shared multiple times on Twitter and LinkedIn and your socials. So a lot of people resonate to it. A relatively simple question. CISO walks in and asks, how many Windows devices do we have? Right, and depending on who answers the question, whether it's the AV team, the IT team, the security team, the CMDB team, whoever it is, they all have a different vantage point of the network. And like any investigation, you need to take everyone's viewpoint in to work out what the actual truth is, so you're not taking a biased opinion, right? So to get a simple answer to a simple question is not always easy, right? Sometimes it requires a little bit more work, and this encapsulates the challenge that we have today. Okay, and as we go down through this, we're going to look at some of the challenges we face and some of the solutions that we can now offer. Okay, and Leyton has already kind of mentioned the evolution of technology over time, and this is why that simple question is difficult to answer, right? And this is more of a visual to what Leyton was talking about, which is the evolution of technology over time. And I'd even go further back. I would say maybe 40 years ago. Things were relatively simple, right? Windows systems on-prem behind a firewall with some antivirus and something to push out some updates. And sure, it came with challenges, and IT teams were seen as these huge intellects. But if you think back now, how simple was that? Because if we start to look at the ecosystem and your cyber landscape now, the introduction of simply introducing virtualized environments, right? And that might seem Stone Age times ago now when VMware come into power. But introducing things like Linux processing and MacBooks and virtualized environments, right? It was similar to traditional IT, but it introduced this new kind of ecosystem of assets. And with that came a whole bunch of management tools and security tools. We started, really going down the vulnerability management route, the endpoint protection routes, things like this. But then, of course, mobile technology, all the way back to the BlackBerry days to the current smartphones we have now and mobile technologies we have now. And that comes again with its own MDM systems and security and management tools. But that is another different type of asset again, right? So not so easy to get full visibility into, understand if there's risks there, and being able to pull all that together at an organizational view. And then, of course, cloud, right? Moving into more modern times now, and with cloud, and I often use the term polycloud, right? Partially just because I like how it sounds, but really just meaning that a lot of enterprise level customers now using multiple cloud environments, right? And if you think of like from a CIO perspective and things, they're using extract and transform and load tools to move different processing I suppose uses to different cloud environments to reduce overall costs on an organization, speed up productivity, all these good stuff that a company needs. But the knock-on effect of that is a nightmare for security teams, because now they have to get full visibility, full understanding of risk and security around all those devices and workloads. And when we think of cloud, we're not just thinking of traditional IT assets. We're now thinking of containerization, serverless functions, cloud workloads, Lambda functions, all of these type of things that are going on now that are all assets in our environment that are, vulnerable to risk if not, correctly configured and correctly monitored and things like this. So now when we think in a modern landscape, it goes from all of these different type of assets. And of course, IoT and OT, we're all touched by IoT in some way or another, from the camera outside the front door to the coffee machine and everything in between. But OT, if you're in kind of that industry, is another huge landscape of asset types, completely different to traditional IT. And quite often, I would say nearly all of the time, the traditional security processes and security protocols that are in place for traditional IT cannot be put in place for OT, because you can't touch those systems at all without having catastrophic results, right? So we need to get visibility over those and what mitigating controls are in place. And this is why it's so difficult. And I know you see just a few logos here, but obviously there's and hundreds of tools that people are using across the globe to do all of these things. Okay, so when we think of an asset, and as I said, an asset can be anything from a traditional IT system to kind of modern workloads, and I just put down kind of 6 questions. And of course, you may have your own questions, but the idea of these questions is, when I think of an organization, and imagine I'm the IT kind of lead here, there's kind of a list of basic questions we should be able to answer with the same degree of confidence as, if someone woke you up from a quick nap and said, "Hey, what's your name?" David, right? You should be able to answer questions about your IT infrastructure with the same speed and level of confidence without requiring a huge investigation to answer a simple question. Questions like, is the asset known and managed in my network? Right? Do I expect this asset to be here, and is it protected by the tools and the processes that it should be protected on for an asset of that type? Yes or no, right? Where is the asset? Where is it physically located? What is it connected to? Things like this. What is the asset? Is it an administrative kind of access asset? Does it have a far reach? What's its ability to influence other assets and its connection to those, right? So what is that asset? What is the impact of that asset if it was breached? The core software on the asset, is it up to date? Is that introducing risk? Right? We have an asset, we know what it is, it's managed, we expect it to be there, we know it does X and Y function, and the software is on it. Is that software at the level that it should be at? Yes or no, right? It might be okay today, but what about a month, 3 months, 6 months from now? Has there been additional software and upgrades added to that asset that weren't originally, in the mandate? And is that additional software introducing any risk? Is that up to date? Is it okay to be there? Is there any anomaly that I need to know about? And effectively answering that kind of bottom question, which kind of encapsulates the whole thing here, which is, does it adhere to my security policies as an organization? Right? You may have your own security mandate, you may be following a framework or whatever. Do my assets follow that? Yes or no? And is there something in place to catch that? Now, I think we're going to run a quick poll here just to kind of to keep you all engaged and ask the question. So the question really is, what do you currently use for asset management? Right? We hear things like people using Excel sheets, people using, CMDBs, their own custom Frankenstein tool of some sort, or some other approach, or maybe they don't have anything at all. So just a quick poll to just gauge the minds of what people are using it there. Unfortunately, I can't vote. Cool. So I think once everyone votes or so, we should be able to close this and get an answer. Mayhaps. Give it a second. Cool. Okay. So there we go. Yeah. Some Excel sheets. Some people have custom tools, and other people use different approaches or don't have anything at all. Right. So this should really resonate with you then today. Right. It's an interesting spread. Generally, I see a pretty even spread across all of these when I do this. Right. Cool. So what we're going to look at today, right, is some of the approaches. Now, this talk track often will talk about CMDBs, but what I want you to be mindful of is it doesn't matter whether you're using Excel sheets, custom tools, another approach, or CMDBs. I'm just using CMDB as an example. This is not a talk to diss a CMDB or anything. It's just to outline the challenges that people face with asset management, and I'm using CMDB as an example. Right. So again, it could be any approach you're using. So when I think of what is, we'll say, a CMDB or your approach to asset management, like your Excel sheets and things like this, typically we're looking at asset inventory for asset management with these type of tools. But it's not really the asset management tool we're looking for in today's kind of landscape. CMDBs and these approaches are often used for tracking specific information traditionally, right? Things like, has a license changed for an operating system, or has there been a hardware change or something like that? And it's then kind of pushed into being used as an asset management tool because it has some of the fields that we would recognize that go with that. But in today's cyber landscape, things like cloud and IoT, and modern workloads, it spans much further beyond what was actually supported traditionally by a CMDB or by these methods and tools that people are using. So with that in mind, who would use this tool? And I see you're all using different methods, but who would use this? Well, everyone, right? Maybe there's a team that tracks servers and workstations across the enterprise, or GRC teams, governance and risk teams, working with those compliance and auditors, to prep for audits. Finance teams, right? Often, maybe they want to track the workstations because they're going to do some sort of a migration to MacBooks, and they just need to know how much they're going to need and what finance is in store to make a switch, right? So they need to know everything they have. Network and infrastructure management teams, right? There's been a big global digital transformation over the last number of years, and they need to understand how to keep track of all those different type of assets. IT architects, right? They need to know where all their stuff is in the network and how many of each they have. And then, of course, security and SecOps. And this is a big team that we work with, just trying to ensure everything is where it needs to be and that everything is working with the devices correctly. Okay. So if that's who uses it and that's what it was for, what challenges and what are the core problems we see with these approaches? And again, it can be your Excel approach, it can be a custom tool or anything else. Just CMDB is an example. But the challenges we're going to talk about here are consistent no matter which tool you're using, right? So some of the challenges we talk about, and I'm just going to give a quick overview of some of the core challenges, is number one is it's not complete, right? CMDBs or Excel sheets and things like this, they're largely a manual process. And sure, you can do some scripting and pull some stuff together, but it's never complete. And it's definitely never up to date because it's usually a manual process, right? So what is the complete picture? We think of workstations, but also cloud native devices, mobile devices, IoT, if you have BYOD policies, things like this that just make everything more complex to be fully complete and fully up to date. right? Not fully contextual. I think this is a really important one, right? Which is what context is super important. We talk about asset intelligence, right? And I'm gonna lay it out in black and white later on what we mean by that. But when we talk about this, we're really talking about what's the relationship from one device to another, or a device to its security appliance or management devices, right? Effectively asking, what's the story of my network? Right? What does it mean if something is missing? What does it mean if there's a control out of place? Right? What is the story here? And we can start making the story of our organization to make more impactful decisions at an organizational level. Not unique. This is a common one we come across. Is there's many things can go wrong with data in this space when you're kind of manually uploading things and trying to blend stuff together, right? Because different data sets can have duplication. So checks they're not easy to do. A device could exist 2, 4, 10 times in a list, and it's hard to accurately report then, and it's very hard to check the box that says yes, we're safe, or yes, it's checked, because in reality you need to check the same thing 10 times just to be 100% sure that they're the same asset, right? So it can be a real pain to try and work through all those that asset data, to the point where a lot of teams just give up and say, I can't use the data, right? Not credible, right? This is another thing. So let's say we do have duplication, but let's say we even don't, right? Let's say there's 2 lines around the same asset, right? But when we talk about a particular data point, often I'll talk about an OS distribution type, right? One data source says it's a Windows 10 device, and another data source says it's a Windows 11. What's true, right? How can you accurately report, right? So if they're saying different things, you don't have that fully comprehensive picture of your assets to make informed decisions. Okay. The last kind of few here then is not up to date, right? So it's, as I said, it is a largely manual process, and sure, it would be great to have it all automated, right? But when it's not up to date, you can't really do much with it, or if you do it, you're very aware that it is probably not correct. And within cybersecurity, you need to know who and what you are at all times to be able to perform those advanced techniques like effective incident response, right? Effective audit preparations, things like this, right? You need to really have a handle on your data, right? And the last one here is know ability, right? So what do I mean here? What I mean here is, often these tools are just a snapshot in time from the last time they're updated, right? So even if you had someone who was, quite diligent, you still can't look back in time to see what the state of play was on a previous date, right? So if you look at it today and you say, hey, we're 80% covered here, we're doing okay here. What were you like a month ago if an investigation came up and you had to look back in time to see where things went wrong or learn from mistakes? You often don't have that ability, okay? So why does it matter? Well, it matters for a number of reasons, right? The obvious ones, like just due diligence, from IT and IT security point of view, and CISO levels and stuff like that, just getting a handle to be able to support processes and other teams. But it also matters when you're following things like frameworks. Often controls 1 and 2 in a lot of these frameworks are full comprehensive hardware inventory and software inventory. And from there, you get a baseline that you can do everything else from, right? And I suppose really what we're talking about here is, the importance of data source diversity, right? It's critical to asset management and ultimately security practitioners. But really what we're saying here is, you hear a lot of no's. The word no said a lot in this space. Like, no, you can't do this. No, you can't pull that. No, you can't merge this. You don't have access. All this type of thing. We really want to move to, and again, it's a bit wordy, but yeses and successes with asset intelligence, where you have the context, you have the ability to ask those questions and build confidence, and even complement CMDBs if you're using them, right? Get everything working in seamlessly, right? And this is where we introduce, how do we address all of that? Well, we address all that with the idea of what we call CAASM. And Leyton already laid out, what the CAASM is here, the Cyber Asset Attack Surface Management. And really, this is focusing on asset visibility and vulnerability challenges in the modern landscape. And really, I suppose the definition really is being able to show and being able to see all assets, both internal and external, through API integrations with the data sources that you already have, right? You do not have a data problem. You do not have a tooling problem. You've had more data than you've ever had before. You have more tools than you've ever had before. The problem here is getting all that together in a usable manner. And this is where CAASM really does that, right? And then being able to query that consolidated data to identify gaps and controls and get on top of everything in a really simple fashion. So what drives it? And again, Leyton has already spoken about this, so I'll just brief over it. IT teams and security teams, whether it's device discovery and endpoint management and config management, or whether it's the incident response teams or vulnerability management teams or prepping for audits, they're really the ones driving the starting point for this. But it fleshes much more beyond those teams with the use cases that this can offer. So as I said, all the tools that you're using, you don't have a tool or a data problem. They're all great collectors of tools or of great collectors of data. What's needed here is an aggregator, right? A correlator, something to bring all of that data together and make it usable. So this is where Axonius comes in, right? And Axonius, the approach we take, and I often call these the three rocks or the three pillars, but they're the three main takeaways, right? And the first one is with Axonius, we're heading upwards of 900 data sources, which I'll talk about in a moment. These are pre-built integrations into your existing tools. Rock one is really building a credible, comprehensive inventory of all your devices. And effectively, we become the system of record for your digital infrastructure. And assets and devices and users and cloud assets and SaaS applications and everything within your digital infrastructure. And if you had that perfect system of record that was up to date and accurate, what would you do with that? Well, you do gap analysis, right? You discover where the coverage gaps are, the risks are, informational gaps are that support all of those processes in your IT. And if you were able to discover gaps and check for them regularly and automate all that, what would you do? Well, you'd obviously validate it and enforce some sort of an action or a policy around that, create some sort of a workflow to address it. And with that, we move from asset intelligence from asset management to asset intelligence. But even that's still a bit wordy. So I just wanted to put it in kind of, plain text what that means, right? So when we say traditional asset management focused on device and license lifecycle, but with asset intelligence, we're moving to show me all of the assets, the context, and bring to the surface what needs attention. Traditional data sources with CMDB or an Excel sheet, right? But with asset intelligence, we're tool agnostic, right? It collects and correlates data from hundreds of data sources. Obviously, each organization will only have a subsection of those, right? Asset types are traditionally physical hardware, but again, the modern landscape with asset intelligence is everything, right? Not just those traditional devices, but everything in between. I suppose results with traditional asset management, you had conflicting data, outdated data, and unusable data. But with asset intelligence, we get a clear understanding of all our assets, how they relate to our policies and protocols, and then building custom response actions when needed easily, right? And the use cases, and again, Leyton has mentioned this earlier, traditionally it's just hardware, software inventory, but with asset intelligence, it's literally, and I listed a few here, but literally there are hundreds. It's really up to what's important for your organization. I list some of the popular ones here, like device discovery, CMDB reconciliation, network and configurational management, vulnerability management and incident response, and endpoint protection management, all these type of things. And we'll talk about some of these during a demo. And again, these are kind of just fleshing out those use cases for the IT teams and security teams to get a better understanding of where they're at with things. Okay. So from there, we're going to jump into the demo. But before we jump into the demo, I suppose I just want to touch on one thing, which is, if what we're talking about today and what you see today in the demo is of interest, you have a couple of options. The slide will obviously be shared after the webinar, and you'll have access to the slides and links. But you can also use the free 30-day trial link, which gives you kind of a self-service access to trial the tool yourself, or you can request a demo if you want to go a bit more into depth on how the tool can work for you and your organization. But of course, beyond all of that, you can feel free to reach out to myself, Leyton, or anyone in the CSI team as well. Okay, and we'll sure to get back with you if you're still unsure of how to go about this, and we can advise on what the best route forward is. Okay, cool. So I'm going to jump into the demo real quick here. Okay. So I generally like to start here on the devices page, right? So what we do here in Axonius is we build up the asset inventory, right? And you can see here from the asset inventory, we have devices, vulnerabilities, users, permissions, software, SaaS applications. We have a whole range of asset types. And this is not an extensive list. It's just what's detected in this demo environment that I have. It goes much further beyond this even, but as it detects the assets, it can start to segregate what type of asset it is. But I'm going to start with on the devices firstly, because it's just easier to understand. And once you understand the approach we take, you will, hopefully be able to start thinking of other use cases that you could use this for. So what are we looking at on the screen? Well, what we're looking at, just imagine this is your organization. And in this, your organization, you have a total of 5,482 unique assets. Right now, I'll explain what unique is and how we get there as we go through. And each line item represents one of these unique assets. And the query wizard gives us the ability to ask questions of our organization. Now, the question that we started off with in the tweet slide was a relatively easy question, which was, how many Windows devices do we have? So I'm typing in the same question here or punching in the same question, and you'll notice it's not scripting, it's not difficult. I'm literally saying, out of my 5,400 assets or devices that I have, show me all of the devices where the operating system type is equal to Windows, right? And we have just over 1,000 Windows devices, right? Nothing mind-blowing about that right now, other than it's very easy to ask a question, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly kind of go around the house, as I call it. And when I come back here to this page, things should start to begin to click, and we can run some gap analysis questions, right? So how do we build this inventory? How do we build this unique list of assets? Well, for that, we use what we call adapters. Right now, the adapters are pre-built API integrations, of which we're closing in on 900 out-of-the-box integrations. And these adapters range across a range of categories. So pretty much any tool you're using, from attack surface management tools to cloud infrastructure, CMDBs like we've mentioned, containerization, DevOps, DLPs, encryption, firewall, switching layer, IoT, ITAMs, NACs, PAMs, SIEMs, SOARs, you name it, right? Whatever you're kind of using, we're going to plug into. We're not going to scan your network. We're not going to deploy agents on your network. We don't do that. What we do is we use these adapters to plug into the tools that you're already using today. So maybe you're a Cisco house, so your networking layer. Maybe you're a Microsoft house, because you've got on-prem AD and cloud AD and Azure, or Defender, or whatever you might have, right? We've got the adapters to plug into all of those there today as well. Maybe you're using VMware for your virtualization or Hyper-V. Maybe you're using Tenable or Qualys or Rapid7 for your scanning. All the way through to, maybe you're using ServiceNow or Zendesk or whatever you might be using for a CMDB or an ITAM solution as well, right? Even if, and I know some of you have already mentioned that you use Excel sheets, right? So if you're using a custom tool, or if you're just using Excel sheets, we can still ingest that data through CSV format. Or if using a custom tool, we can ingest through JSON format. Okay. And even if there's a tool on your network that you can't physically connect to, we can still ingest that data in a particular format for you. And what do we do, right? Well, when we connect to these things, how do they work, right? And I'm just going to click on one here. And what we do is we punch in a destination, so a URL or an IP or a host name, and a set of credentials, API keys, username and password. Each one, can vary, and they're all documented on our docs page on what's needed, but they're pretty much read-only non-admin permissions. And what we do is we set a schedule. So what we do is we pull from that data source on a regular basis, right? And it's read-only permission, so it's low touch to your tool sets. And once we pull in those data, or all those data from those data sources, And I'm just going to look at this device discovery screen here. Okay. We can see here, and this kind of illustrates, remember I talked about the 3 pillars of the 3 rocks. Pillar 1 being build a credible and comprehensive inventory. This is what we're talking about here. So let's say in this organization, I'm connected to ServiceNow, McAfee, and Palo, and Cisco, and I'm connected to Tanium, and Clarity, and Tenable, and all these different tools, right? Obviously, your own organization will have your tool set. And we can see that there's numbers here beside the data source. So I'm pulling in 4,300 from ServiceNow, 3,600 from McAfee, 3,200 from Palo, 2,600 from Cisco, and so on and so forth. But think of your laptop or a virtual machine or a desktop or whatever it might be, cloud workload. It can live in multiple locations. So you may have a device that's got a record in your CMDB. It also has a McAfee agent on it. It also communicates across the network. It's got a Tanium agent. It's got scanned once a week by Tenable, right? So basically that one asset can live in multiple locations, right? So what does Axonius do? Axonius, if I add up all of the assets from all of the data sources, I get a total devices seen count here of 41,500. But as I know, devices live on multiple data sources. So what I can start to do is say, hey, the asset that lives on data source 1 is the same as the asset that lives on data source 2, and it's the same as the asset that lives on data source 3. So I'm going to create a master record, call it asset 1, and now I have an entire body of information about that asset from any data source that knows about it. But also, if there's any conflicting data across the data sources, Axonius correlation engine is going to work that out for you as well to tell you which one is most likely to be true. And what you get left with is a total unique devices count. And for each device, you have a comprehensive body of information that has been deconflicted and deduplicated and things like that as well. So hopefully that makes sense. And when I go back to this asset page, which I asked how many Windows devices do we have, what I'm going to do is let's ask a very basic question. And let's say, for example, my security mandate in my organization says every Windows device or Windows endpoint or whatever it might be, every Windows machine, active Windows machine, which I'm asking here, show me all the Windows devices. And we use kind of Boolean logic here, and or and not. And I'm saying, show me all of the Windows devices, and out of all of those Windows devices, show me which ones have been seen in the last 30 days. I can see there's 1,045. And I want to see out of all of these active Windows devices, my security mandate states that all of my active Windows devices should be running endpoint protection or antivirus or be scanned every week or whatever it might be. So I want to see if that's not happening or if there's any deviance from that. So I can say something like, say CrowdStrike. I'm using this as my endpoint protection agent or whatever, Sentinel-1, Carbon Black, whatever you're using. So I'm saying here now is, show me all of my Windows devices that have been seen by any data source in the last 30 days. And out of those 1,045 devices, show me the ones that exist in CrowdStrike today. And I can see there's 268 devices that are active Windows machines that have CrowdStrike on them, which means there's a whole bunch that don't, that deviate from my policy. So I can use the inverse here, and I can say, show me all of the active Windows devices that do not have CrowdStrike, but should have. And I'm doing that in about 3 seconds without having to go to multiple teams and multiple tools to do that, right? So I can see very quickly, I have 777 devices not compliant with my policy, right? I could even add to this. I could say, out of those 777 devices, show me the ones that were never seen by a vulnerability scan or a particular scan policy or whatever it may be. So I'm layering this up now across tools. So I'm saying here's 618 devices that are missing their endpoint agent and have not been seen by my vulnerability scanner, right? And there's a whole range of use cases of which all documented, and you get help to build these up as well. And we work with you to help you query your data. But there's a whole range of use cases that you can play with here, right? Because we have all data fields from all data sources on all assets. So you can query anything across any tool without having to go from team to team and tool to tool and go through all that processes. We have all the data, okay? So let's say I like kind of these queries, and let me go back to my basic one here. I don't want to come in here and run, I don't want to come in here and run this query every day. What I want to do is I want to save this off. I give it a name. I call it missing CrowdStrike agents, something like that. And I can save that off. Once I save that off, right, because we've done some gaps now, I want to move on to that third rock, which is closing the gap off. So we can use things like the enforcement center to create think of this like an enforcement center is basically your automation center, right? It creates workflows. So what we can start to do is start off pretty basic, hey, I want you to run that query to check for missing agents or malfunctioning agents or missing vulnerability scans or any devices missing certain data or IPs missing from a firewall rule policy or whatever it is. Okay. And hey, I want you to check on a regular basis, like once a day, once a week, once a month, once an hour. And if you find something, send me an email or send me a Slack message or download the list of assets to a share drive somewhere, right? Just notify me. Would that help? It completely depends on the organization and the maturity of your tool sets, right? Maybe we go on further and say, hey, what I want you to do is I want you to automatically check, but hey, if you find some, I want you to go ahead and create a ticket or an incident in my ticketing tool or incident tool or whatever tools I'm using, right? So we can start to automate an action, get it assigned to the correct people around there, right? And then we can do even more, like managing CMDB assets. We talked about CMDBs, right? If anyone is using a CMDB, maybe a question I ask is, are there any devices in my organization that currently don't have a record in my CMDB? You found some? Cool. Why don't you go populate my CMDB with those assets? And let's go on further. Why don't you go to those assets in my CMDB? And if there's any of those data fields, like we mentioned earlier on, like thinking the OS type and distribution type as the example, if there's any data fields that I don't fully trust because they don't get updated very often, or I don't trust them because of the data source, maybe I go ahead and I update that field with the corresponding field from Axonius. So now I have a fully populated, fully up-to-date CMDB. Okay. And of course, when we put all that together and we're running our actions, we're running our queries, we're running our checks, we can, of course, report and dashboard, based on whatever it is I'm looking for, whether it's those common questions like I want to get a breakdown of my asset types in the cloud infrastructure I have, a breakdown of my OS distributions, what my coverage model is for my vulnerability scanners or my endpoint agents, or I want to check for something over time, trending reports, see what versions of agents I'm running and what locations my assets are in, or break up my assets by criticality based on whatever rule sets I have set up. So there's a whole range of things in here we can begin to do, and even supporting things like frameworks like NIST, right? So following the rules and the frameworks in NIST, like understanding all of your assets, breaking down devices by device type, and servers and endpoints and things like this as well, where we can really start supporting those different checks in those frameworks so that you can easily report on them as and when you need to, because you already have the data all of the time up to date. That doesn't mean you have to go do and run investigations every time. You will already have it up to date. So I suppose just to kind of finish up here really is what we've looked at currently is just devices, right? It requires a little bit more time and a little bit of understanding of what you're using. But of course, what we've spoken about right now is just device inventory and gaps in devices, but also we do vulnerability inventory, user inventory, software inventory, SaaS application inventory. We even do the configuration of your SaaS tools to see if there are any misconfigured items in your SaaS infrastructure that maybe follow line which are policy frameworks as well. And we have all that under one kind of roof. And I suppose the beauty of having it all under one roof, and we use a thing called an asset graph here, but the beauty, and it kind of just illustrates it all quite well, is the beauty of having all of the asset types and all of the data under one roof is we can start to link data together. So in this storyboard here that I kind of created was, show me what users in my organization are using a particular SaaS application, because maybe the SaaS application has been breached or popped or something like that. And you want to see how many users are using it in your organization. And from that, I want to see how many devices are associated to those users. And out of those devices, I want to see what vulnerabilities are on those devices. And we can really whittle down and start to do investigations because we have all the data here collectively. That doesn't require you to go everywhere to get it. So I'm aware that this is kind of a lot of information, but obviously happy to jump on a demo or a call to give you more information around any of the aspects that we're doing here around any of this. And of course, there's a whole world of SaaS infrastructure as well to discuss. Like if we wanted to look at, if there's any misconfigured items in a SaaS product, I'm looking at Azure AD here, looking for any misconfigured settings that have high impact that maybe are associated to, a particular standard, right? So maybe we're looking at misconfigured items in my Azure AD that are associated to the NIST 853 framework, because I want to go ahead and adjust these. I can see what the value is, what I need to do, and what the next steps are, and what framework they're associated to. So we can really go from the basic use cases to the most sophisticated asset type use cases that we can do here. So I'm going to pause here because I'm just conscious of time as well. But just leaving you with the understanding that we cover your entire cyber landscape. We become the system of record for your digital infrastructure, allowing you to do whatever and ask whatever question you need to ask of your organization. So thank you very much for listening. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, so on that, David, actually, we've had a couple of questions come through as the recording and the demo have been coming through. One of the questions is, can I bring together vulnerability data from multiple vulnerability management tools? I think that was something that you were running through when you were talking about the assets that are under management and how you can bring the data in to cross-correlate. I'm just wondering if you can expand on that, particularly around multiple vulnerability management tools.
Yeah, let me just see if I have any here in my demo environment that I can show. Let me see real quick. So yes is the quick answer. So basically, we come across a couple of things. And let me explain really quickly how the vulnerability section works, right? So how it works, first off, is we're able to build software inventories, right? So we have this mechanism where we pull in all the CVEs from a repository. The repository is literally connecting to the NVD database. So we're going to the NVD and say, hey, NVD, give me all of the CVEs you know about, right? That's the starting point. And then if you have software, software X running version Y, we can associate CVEs to software. Now, it's not a replacement for vulnerability management tools or anything like that. What's cool here is you can also say, a customer may not have a vulnerability management tool, so this will help. Or a customer may have multiple vulnerability management tools, right? Maybe they have an enterprise tool for a particular set of systems and some other tools for the rest of their estate or whatever. And I come from the vulnerability management background myself, so I understand this space quite well, right? So a nice question here will be, often there are gaps in my scanning. So I could say a question real quick, like imagine I'm using Tenable.io here real quick, right? So I could say, show me all the vulnerabilities in my organization that maybe Tenable has not seen, right? Because maybe I couldn't reach the device. Maybe the device was offline. Maybe it's a fragile part of my network that I'm unable to scan or whatever it might be, right? So I can say here, are there any vulnerabilities that my Tenable.io has not seen? And out of those, are any of those, critical or high? Critical or high, right? And out of those vulnerabilities, out of critical and high vulnerabilities that are missed, do any of these vulnerabilities exist on the CISA known exploited vulnerability database? So vulnerabilities that are actively being exploited in the wild today, right? And I can see if there's any there. And I can see there's one here, 21674, on 6 devices. And I can drill into these devices and, of course, create an action around that, right? But to answer the question, I suppose, is yes. So if you have vulnerability data from Qualys and Tenable, we can blend them together and say, show me any vulnerability seen by both, or not seen by one, or not seen by any. and you can start to blend all that together in one single view here.
Perfect. Thanks for that. That was really good to jump into the demo there, actually, on that particular question. Yeah, another one that's come through. I think you went through that on the demo, actually, but it might be just worth just refreshing and going back over it. Was is there a list of available adapters that they can see? So I think obviously that goes back to the sort of the wealth of partnerships and technology partnerships you've got under adapters, right?
Yeah, so you can obviously come into the adapters in the product and look at them, right? But if you don't have the product, how would you know, right? If you're just assessing, right? So we do have, and I often just have this up, but we do have a list of A to Z adapters on our docs page. You know, so let's say you're using Census, right? I can go into Census, I can see what parameters I need for that adapter to connect to it, what it looks like in the Axonius tool, what permissions are required, and where I would go to get those credentials. So even if you didn't manage that tool and you just wanted to send this link over to the team that does to say, hey, Bob, managing Census, I need these credentials with these permissions to connect Axonius in. Okay,
Cool.
and they're all listed here.
Brilliant. Yeah, what we'll do is we'll actually off today's webinar, I'll look to include that link in the slides, actually, David, just for reference for those that have joined. Just one from me, really. I know it's not something that we've actually covered off really in discussion, but in terms of deployment, you know, just for visibility for those on the call, can this either be deployed in the cloud or can it be deployed on-prem? Just architecturally, how does this typically work in an organization?
Yeah, so the quick answer, and I should have really covered this, so apologies, but the quick answer is it doesn't matter, right? So this can be deployed on-prem on your own estate. We just give you a virtual appliance image, and you can deploy it, you know, locally. Or if you have your own private cloud, we can give you the image for that, or we can host it for you as a SaaS offering, and you just get the login details. The backend is hosted on AWS. And you can obviously choose the locations and things like that as well. So it really doesn't matter to us where you want your data housed. We can work with you in any, and it's feature parity. So you get the same level of access no matter what.
Perfect. Yep, thanks very much. So I think we've got one final poll for everybody. And this is just really a request for information on where the interest would be, particularly around a follow-up to today's webinar. So, you know, obviously reaching out to you, you know, CSI client directors will follow up off the back of today's webinar with yourselves. But just interested to understand, you know, what would you like to see next? Would you like to have a setup of another demo, a bit more of a detailed breakdown, and maybe a more one-to-one session with David and myself? Or would you be interested in the self-service for the free trial? If you'd be kind enough as to just maybe answer the poll, we can take that information away and then come back in regards to follow-up actions of today's webinar, really. But in regards to today's session, obviously I wanted to say thank you very much for joining. We've obviously looked forward to hopefully continuing today's conversations with you. Feel free absolutely to reach out to either myself or David and marketing, actually, who have kindly organised today's sessions. Our contact information, it will be found in today's slides, which David went through earlier before the demo, but we'll make sure that those get sent out to you. Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, all the slides are obviously going to be sent to you, the recording also. And yeah, just finally, just wanted to say on behalf of David and I, thank you for your time. Thanks for joining and listening, and we look forward to hopefully speaking again soon and following up on today's webinar.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.